Hey, everybody. Welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby. And of course, we talk about things that small and medium-sized nonprofits doing wonderfully great big things can use on a day-to-day basis to inspire, to make sure that their year is great. And I am so excited about this conversation today because it's something that I think if you're looking at how to increase your awareness, you're increasing your conversations with potential donors and sponsors, and actually just people who know who the hell you are at an organization. We're going to talk about branding, and we're going to talk about, this is going to make me sound super smart, so listen carefully. We're going to talk about the marketing psychology principles. Yeah, I'm going to use those in the show notes because it's going to make me feel great. And I'm ecstatic to have Ross Kimbarovsky. Oh my God, it's the worst. I am the worst at pronouncing these things. CEO and founder of Crowdspring. Ross, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Happy to be here. And as I told you earlier, I mispronounced my name about 1,500 times. So as long as you beat 1,500, you're perfectly fine.
I'm starting out on a win. I appreciate that, and you make me feel great. That's great. So if we're scrolling through iTunes and we're scrolling through YouTube and we see the idea of marketing and branding and the psychology principles of marketing, and this intrigues you as a nonprofit leader or as a small business, but you have no idea who Ross is or who Crowdspring is, can you give us kind of a 5,000-foot level on who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are?
Sure. Well, let me start with Crowdspring. Crowdspring helps nonprofits, entrepreneurs, small businesses, and agencies with everything from custom logo design to web design to marketing materials, product design, and even naming businesses and organizations. We have 220,000 freelancers around the world, clients in 100 countries. We believe that great design doesn't have to cost tens of thousands of dollars. Our projects start at $299 across most categories. And it's a different business model. We'll talk about that a little bit as we get into the conversation. Just a couple of words about me. I'm from Ukraine. I was born in Kiev, Ukraine, emigrated in '79. I started my career as a lawyer. I spent 13 years practicing law, intellectual property and complex commercial litigation, and started Crowdspring for the same reasons a lot of entrepreneurs start businesses. I was redesigning my firm's website. I went through this typical process that nonprofits and businesses are familiar with. I put together my requirements. I talked to providers. I talked to agencies. I hired one, paid them a lot of money, waited. They gave us their designs and I hated them. And I said, this is frustrating. How is it that we're stuck buying design services in this model where you pay somebody a lot of money and then you get something you may or may not like? And that led to a lot of research and thinking and interviews with nonprofits, with entrepreneurs, and ultimately Crowdspring, where we flipped the model upside down. We reduced prices 10 to 50 times. So $299 for custom logos as opposed to tens of thousands. And this is one of the big differences. Rather than picking from bids and proposals, designers do actual designs. So if you're looking for a new logo for your nonprofit, you're picking from dozens of custom logos for your new nonprofit. And you pick the one you like. So that's a model that's so different from what used to be in place. And it's how we buy everything. It's how we buy clothes. It's how we buy cars. It's how we pick nonprofits. We look at them and we decide the one we want to support, as opposed to waiting for somebody to come to the scene.
I have so many questions. This is going to be such a fascinating conversation. I think big or small, whether you're a big nonprofit or a small nonprofit, your first impression matters the most. What you say, what you do, what your impact is. A lot can be said of a logo. A lot can be said of what your brand is out of the gate. From your experience, what's one of the big things that both big and small groups or nonprofits need to think about when it comes to a brand or a logo? Like what's the one thing that you should, or one of the first things you should think about when you are talking about your own brand?
So let's get a couple of terms in place so that we have a common understanding, because I think one of the problems, both in the nonprofit and for-profit space, by the way, is that founders and organizers don't have a really crisp understanding of what it means to have a brand or a brand identity. So for example, if you ask a nonprofit, what's your brand? A lot of them will say, well, here's my logo. And here's the thing. A logo is not your brand. A logo isn't even your entire brand identity. So brand identity is everything visual about your organization. And this concept applies to nonprofits 100% as much as it applies to for-profit businesses. So it is your logo, it's your name, it's your website, it's business cards, it's your signs, it's the t-shirts your donors and volunteers are wearing, it's your letterhead, it's how you communicate. Your brand is every touch point. It's everything beyond visual. And so if you look at some of the biggest nonprofits in the world, a lot of the reasons they're successful is because they've invested in both their visual identity and in building a strong brand and building credibility. And it all comes down to, both in terms of visual identity and brand, to credibility. And if we take a step back, we rate each other when we meet for the first time and we don't know that person. We look at them and we make very quick impressions about them. It has to do with the credibility. Do they seem credible to me? And sometimes the meetings are completely out of context. You see somebody in a coffee shop, and so you don't have a lot of context. But if you are approaching a donor, if you're approaching a volunteer, if you're talking to other nonprofits, there is context there. You're trying to get some result. They're trying to get some result. So when we look at somebody and evaluate their credibility, first impressions matter a lot. And the reason they matter is because our brains are visual. We process images 60,000 times faster than we process words. So when you see somebody across the room and you look at them, way before they open their mouth to say something to you, you have already subconsciously formed an impression of that person. And the thing is that our brains are wired in a way where what happens after that is going to be influenced by those first impressions. And it works just the same with design, with logos. If you have a poor looking logo and people see it, they're going to form a first impression that maybe you're not serious, maybe you're not professional, maybe the effort you're putting forth, regardless of your mission, your values, and everything else you're doing, maybe you're just not in this in a serious manner. And everything they hear after that is going to be put through that filter. And that's a really tough, it's actually a principle of psychology that's very powerful. It's called the anchoring effect, that people subconsciously latch onto the first thing they hear. So your image, your visual identity, how you talk, what you say, what you show people is so critically important from the first time that you get in front of somebody.
How important is that now in a virtual setting, right? You don't even have the luxury of maybe getting a little extra time to formulate that first impression, right? You go into a coffee shop, maybe you're ordering a coffee, you see them across the room, you've got time to kind of feel that person out. In a virtual setting, you're logging onto a Zoom call and you've got one you're snap judging even faster, I would imagine, in a virtual setting, because we have the attention span of gnats nowadays, right?
So it's even more important in a virtual setting for a simple reason. When we interact outside of video, we look for nonverbal cues. So when you're talking to a person, you're looking for nonverbal cues. You're looking for hand movement, whether somebody's using their hands. You're looking for eye movement. You're looking for whether somebody's looking at you. You're looking for body posture, if they're standing or sitting. You're looking for small little tics that they may show. Nonverbal communication is the majority of the communication that our brains process subconsciously to try to make judgments about other people. In a virtual world, most of that is missing. We don't see that. We don't see people's hands generally. We don't see their body postures. It's hard to pay attention to all of that. And especially if we're in a Zoom or another video call with 15 squares there and lots of people, we can't see these individual things. But, and this is the important thing, visual design, logos, websites don't change. They don't have nonverbal cues. They are strictly 100% visual, which means that whether it's virtual or you're looking at it in the real world on a business card, what you see is what you get. And so if it's poor on a business card, it's going to look poor in a virtual setting.
By the way, while we're doing this, because we're recording this in a visual sense too on Zoom for playback and video, every time Ross mentioned something like hand gestures or posture, I adjusted A, my hand gestures, and B, my posture. And I just know mentally doing that, like, I better do this while he's looking at me. One of the things that you just said is great, which is it never changes. So walk me through, because I know people are listening to this and like, hey, I'm a small nonprofit. Or I'm just starting out. maybe I need to rebrand because I think my logo was a little bit done. They go to Fiverr. And that's hey, when you're starting out as a business owner, I know this would, you started your business, you don't know where to go. This is an option. $5, I can pay for someone to get a logo. Like, walk me through kind of how we overcome our mental hurdles on paying for, because again, what you've got at Crowdspring, which is really important, is you've got this, 50 times less than it costs to design something model, which is wonderful. Walk me through the brain transformation that we need to make in order to be purposeful and spend and take some resources to put that together, rather than just going, I got a couple of clip art pieces that I've got on the old internet, and I'm going to use that.
So purposeful is a really good word, because every organization has a brand. You don't necessarily have a brand identity. You don't necessarily have a visual identity, but you have a brand. And what's important about brand is it's not what you say it is. You could say that we're a great nonprofit that helps, kids in 15 states with education. What's important to brand is what people think it is. It's how people react to your brand. And your visual identity is really important to that brand. This is the mistake that many nonprofits and many for-profit companies make. They underinvest in good design. Getting a logo for $5 is under-investing in good design. Why? What you're getting is clip art, a template, something generic. It looks like thousands of other nonprofits, thousands of other businesses. There's no connection to your organization. So what happens in the short term is you paid $5 and you're sitting there happy saying, I've got a logo. Mm-hmm. What happens in the midterm is that you struggle to create a strong visual brand because your organization looks like everybody else. Imagine if your donors came to a nonprofit conference where nonprofits were pitching, and every nonprofit had the same table, the same sign, people were dressed in exactly the same outfit, everybody had blonde or black hair, and there was no difference. How would donors differentiate? If all the messaging was the same, if all the visual design was the same, if everybody looked the same? They couldn't. And this is the problem with things like generic and clip art logos. There's no way to build a strong, unique identity for your nonprofit. And so what we tell nonprofits is underinvesting in good design is going to cost you a lot more in the mid to long term, because what will happen is you will struggle to create a broader base of donors. You'll struggle to attract volunteers. Now, let me take a step back, because this is something that a lot of agencies that work with nonprofits say too, and there's one big difference. I'm very practical when it comes to this. You can't solve an underlying problem with good design. In other words, your nonprofit still has to stand for something. You've got to have a great mission. You've got to have values that drive that. You've got to be committed to doing great work and social good, because you could have the best designed website and the best designed logo, and if all of that is terrible, you're not going to be able to succeed. And so those work hand in hand. But if you look at some of the best brands, first of all, they don't have complicated, expensive logos, websites. They look for simplicity, and simplicity is important. The best brands, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, understand that a small investment in custom design. So United Way's logo doesn't look like anybody else's. And if you look at the top 100 nonprofits, you'll find that their brand identities, their logos, their websites look unique. They're using unique colors. The way they communicate is unique. Mm-hmm. That's what you want to aspire for, because ultimately, if you truly are committed to building a great organization, you should invest as much of your thinking in visual design as you do in some of the other choices you make early on about your mission, your values, the people that volunteer and how you work with them, because those are foundations for building a bigger brand.
Part of that is too, it's a holistic approach. You cannot dump all your things into one, otherwise the one-legged stools don't stand very well, right? And if you're thinking about it from a fundraising standpoint, if you put very little into your annual giving, and you put everything into grants or everything into events, what happens when there's a global pandemic? You can't do events. You have no other things to sort of build upon because you relied on this one thing. This holistic approach to your marketing, this holistic approach to your branding includes logo includes some of that, so that branding mentality that you have to invest in. You can't invest in just one thing. You have to be sort of have that balanced approach. And I really do like that as a thing to ring in the back of people's brains, is that this is part of a holistic run on what people think about you and your organization as a whole.
And that's precisely true. And I'll give you a good example of why not investing holistically hurts you.
Yes.
So let's say you're a phenomenally dynamic founder. You started this great organization. You do so much good all over the world. You've got volunteers who are phenomenal. You meet a prospective donor and you make a pitch, and this person is thinking about contributing, a lot of money to your organization. What happens afterwards? So as humans, we have all sorts of cognitive biases, meaning our brains do all sorts of tricks on us. And one of these biases is called the action paralysis principle. We commonly second guess our behavior, especially if we don't know exactly how our decisions will impact us or people close to us. So here's a good example of not investing holistically. You meet somebody, you give them a pitch. They love the pitch. What do they do next? They go to the web. They find your organization, and they find a website that looks like it was created by a 10-year-old, or that looks like every other website. And now they step back and think, well, I'm not sure these guys are very serious. I'm not sure what this organization does. There's chaos on the page. I don't see photos of the people they help. They told me this great story, but I don't see the photos. I don't see videos. I don't really see a crisp description of what they do. I don't see their volunteers. Are they a real organization? So when you don't approach this holistically, and people are going to find you on the web. People today look at every single organization, every single business with whom they interact. So when you don't approach these decisions holistically, you can do great in one area and then completely undercut yourself later on in another area.
Yeah, that's absolutely so true. And I think a lot of people, here's a question too. And a lot of nonprofits, especially the small and medium-sized ones, and maybe even if you're a small business, I don't have enough time, Ross. I gotta pick one lane, and there's nothing I can do about it because I've got other things to do in programs and services. How do you, because I know that's bringing in people's ears, like, yeah, I'd love to do this. I'd love to have a logo, and I'd love to have this, and I'd love to talk about my branding. I don't have the time. I'm a 1 or 2 person shop. How do you have conversations with your clients, and what would you say to a nonprofit that counters with, I don't have the time to do that?
Well, that was one of the drivers for starting Crowdspring in the first place. I didn't have the time to talk to freelancers and agencies and look at portfolios and look at bids and compare what they were doing. Yeah. I said, why can't I buy it like I buy my t-shirts? I want to walk into a store. I want to look at a bunch of t-shirts and I want to buy the one I like. Why is that so difficult in the world of creative arts? And ultimately, there are challenges, and we work hard to overcome those challenges. And so that's why our projects work completely differently. We walk you through a simple question and answer. We've honed this over 12 years in business, which articulates who your audience is and what your mission is and what you're seeking to do. And then we let our creative community know about it. And this is the beauty. They start submitting custom designs. All you're doing is giving feedback to these designs, what you like and what you don't like. You can invest as much or as little time as you want. You obviously want to give feedback. You want to give direction because designers are not mind readers. They can't create something without understanding how you feel about it. But the time committed is tiny in comparison, but what you would have to do if you started looking at bids and proposals and writing requirements and interviewing people and then deciding who you hire. And this is the important thing. There's a huge difference in the level of risk. In the traditional marketplace, when you hire somebody, you commit funds, they give you something, you like it or don't like it, but you pay them. On Crowdspring, we guarantee our projects 100%. If you don't like a design, you get 100% of your money back. And we feel comfortable doing that because we have a very talented community of creatives. We qualify each person in every project category. In fact, our sign up for designers is closed for 5 years. We periodically reopen it, and we have waiting lists of tens of thousands throughout the time. And then we requalify people several times a year to make sure they're doing high quality work. So I get the pain of not having the time. I mean, I started my business 12 years ago. There wasn't enough time to do anything. But this is the mistake that a lot of people make. There are plenty of things that we do as entrepreneurs. And I made this mistake in the beginning as well. And I'm sure periodically I do the same thing. There are many things we do as entrepreneurs. There are many things we do as organizers of nonprofits that are effectively busy work. We're trying to do things right. And so we invest time in doing that for a period of time until we feel comfortable. But we're not always doing the right things. And doing the right things is far more important, especially early, because it lets you focus on building a holistic foundation. That's the thing about foundations, whether it's a foundation for a building or a foundation for a nonprofit. If the foundation is solid and strong throughout, then you've got a good foundation. If only half of the foundation is built solidly and the other half is rickety, you don't. It's going to collapse.
Yep.
And so whether we're talking about visual foundations or actual concrete foundations, it works the same way. You can't have a terrible visual identity and a really good personable approach to donors and volunteers, because they're going to hurt each other. Just like you can't have a great visual identity and a terrible communication style, and both of those are important.
Right. How, if you're a nonprofit and you're looking like, boy, I think this sounds like me. This sounds like somebody that I could use either a refresh or somebody to take a peek at kind of what I'm doing. Is there anything that a nonprofit or a small business can do to do self-reflection on whether that is something they want to go forward? How do they just, okay, I got a gut feeling that this is something that we need to talk about or at least discuss internally. I think there's a time and a place to invest in this. What's the first step that an organization can look at to see if this is something that they should be doing?
So my suggestion, we have a phenomenal guide that I'm sure you'll have in the show notes
Yes.
on our blog on nonprofit branding. So it's crowdspring.com/blogs/nonprofit-branding. And this guide gets into all of the details of what it takes to brand a nonprofit, to create a brand identity for a nonprofit with examples. One of the tools we talk about in that guide, and this is the first place they should start. I mean, they should read the guide, but the first place to start is something called a SWOT analysis, SWOT. A SWOT analysis is traditionally the domain of corporations.
Right.
Nonprofits generally don't know about it, but it's SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's an exercise in trying to identify what's good about your nonprofit today. So obviously, if you're starting a new nonprofit, this is tougher to do. And so you don't need to go through a SWOT analysis. But if you've been operating a nonprofit and you're sitting there thinking, how could I do better? I've got this great mission. I've got these people that I really want to help. I'm having a tough time raising the money to do it. I'm having a tough time finding enough volunteers that help me. So SWOT analysis lets you look at what you're really good at, your strengths. And we walk you through the series of questions that you should be asking yourself. What are your core strengths? And then weaknesses. What are things you're not nearly as good at? One of those weaknesses could be your visual identity and the fact that it's holding you back. And you'll see an example in that nonprofit branding guide of a nonprofit that rebranded and significantly changed its course of history in terms of donors and other things, because they just focused much harder on who they were and differentiated from everybody else. And that made a difference. Opportunities. So what's your opportunity to do better? Where can you do better? It may be not just visual brand, but there may be other things that you can do, and the way you communicate, the way you send emails to donors, the different events in which you participate, and then threats. What are the threats to you? Because let's face it, 2020 was a tough year for people. I mean, some people made a lot of money in the market, but overall people are struggling, and there are a lot of donors who are having a tough time keeping their families fed, who are keeping a tough time staying afloat. Unemployment was record rate. So nonprofits are struggling too. And so at a time when there are more people in need, there are fewer people that are able to donate, even if they want to. And so that's an opportunity to evaluate where can you go from here. So the SWOT analysis is a phenomenal tool. And we give you dozens of questions that you can ask and go through this exercise. And that's a starting point. And in the nonprofit branding guide, we walk you through the strategy for how do you rebrand. So for a nonprofit, you're not going to rebrand like a big corporation where they spend millions of dollars with an agency and the agency redesigns everything, and all of a sudden you have this big launch and all the letterhead is redone all at once, because nonprofits don't have the funding to do that, nor do you need to do that. The beauty is that you can commit to a rebranding process over a period of time, let's say 6 months or a year. You can get your donors and your volunteers involved in that process. You can tell that as part of your story, and that becomes interesting. So one of the things we do on Crowdspring and all design projects, for example, is we give you free focus groups. You can pick your up to 12 favorite designs and launch a private or public focus group, however you want. And you can launch as many as you want and share these designs with others and get their feedback. So one way nonprofits do this, and it's a very cool use for these focus groups, is they'll share a focus group with their donors. They'll say, hey, we're looking to rebrand. Here are the drivers for that. What do you think about this new branding? And then they'll share another focus group with their volunteers and staff and say, we're thinking about this. Here are some of the drivers. What do you think? And they may share another one publicly on Twitter or Facebook and just ask the broader community, here's what we've been doing. We think we can do better with a visual design. We really want to push our organization forward. What do you think? You've got your stakeholders involved in this decision. You've got the general public. You get to tell your story, and storytelling is really important. So people love organizations that don't sit still, but that constantly evolve, which is the reason why lots of commercial companies, lots of for-profit companies periodically rebrand, because they want to continue to tell a more modern. Burger King just rebranded a couple of days ago, and they're one of the most successful companies on the planet. Now, you're not going to find a ton of nonprofits who are successful rebranding, in part because there's a little different perspective in the nonprofit space. They've got a good identity. They've got a good, strong brand. There isn't the same need. They're not trying to make more and more money every year like commercial companies. But if you're not United Way, if you're not, one of the big nonprofits in the space, then you need to do some things that put your organization forward. And so, getting a strong brand, if you have an existing nonprofit, doesn't cost a lot of money, but it's really important. It's a differentiator as much as your message and everything else is.
Ross, what you just said was really amazing, because I think nonprofits are always looking for a way to communicate with their donors and supporters without asking them for money. Well, if you've got an opinion, I'd like to invest in your time. I would like you to give us your thoughts. All of a sudden, that donor and that supporter are talking about and learning about and sort of engaging with your organization, talking about, hey, I've got some suggestions on your logo, or hey, here's a couple of ideas. They feel like they're invested and they don't have to pay a penny, which makes them feel really good about talking with you, which makes them feel even more in-depth connected. So the next time you do ask for money, they feel like they can give a little bit more because they have invested a little bit more, which is time, energy, effort, and then opinion in the first place. What a unique concept for that crowdsourcing logo idea. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a principle of psychology that actually speaks to this, and this is a cool application of it in the nonprofit space. So the reciprocity principle, that people feel an obligation to do something good for you if you did something good for them. Now, in this case, involving them in conversation about your branding isn't directly doing something good for them, but as you said, it's a really neat way to say to them, look, I'm not looking for money from you. I want your advice. I want you to help me. And donors feel really empowered. It's something that I talk about a lot with business owners, with nonprofit founders, is the best way to communicate with your audience, with the people you want to talk to, isn't to sell them. The best way is to find organic opportunities to say something to them that matters, that have nothing to do with your big ask. And if you can do that, if you could show them that you're interested in them, that you're interested in their opinion, that you're interested in the things that impact them, the ask becomes so much easier, whether you're asking for a donation or you're asking somebody to buy your product or service.
We talk about it all the time on this show. Third-party endorsement is exponentially more important than first-party solicitation. And if you are investing the time in order for your group to give opinions on how your branding is and how your marketing is, and you're asking them to engage with you, they're going to talk to their friends about how cool it was that your organization reached out to them to ask their opinion and say, hey, you got to check this out. I'm going to forward you that. I'm going to share this. all of a sudden you've got people who are not on your payroll talking about how amazing your organization are. That you can't buy that type of marketing. And you've done it with engaging them on a totally different topic than gifts.
Yep, and it's powerful. So we've done projects. I mean, our bread and butter are nonprofits, small businesses, 1 to 10 employees.
Mm-hmm.
But we've done projects like this with the United Nations. We've done projects like this with countries. So Greenland, when they rebranded, ran a Crowdspring project and got their citizens involved in
Yes.
input on this stuff. So it's such a great way to connect with your audience in an unusual way without asking them for anything but their honest opinions about things. And it's powerful. So we're not just talking about, obviously, input on logos, but as a nonprofit, as an organizer, if you're working for a nonprofit, any opportunity you can find to connect with donors, with volunteers that doesn't relate directly to your ask is such a great opportunity. It gives you the chance to say to somebody, I value something other than your ability to write a check.
Right. A part of this value too, I would imagine, is asking them what their opinions are about your personal brand or how you're perceived in the public square, right? I mean, if you've got somebody who's a donor, they already buy into what you're trying to sell. But maybe it's reaching out to people who do not give to you and asking them on how they think you exist. Is that a good plan? Is this setting yourself up for hating the fact that you actually did it in the first place? What sort of things can you reveal from those who have no idea who you are about giving them full access to go, all right, hey, let me have it. What do you think? Reddit does this all the time. Roast me on Reddit. There's an entire thread where you just post your picture and they're like, all right, roast me. And it's the most horrible thing. And I don't want you to feel like that, but there's an opportunity there, isn't there, to engage those?
Incredibly true. So we do a series of webinars. We've done webinars for probably at this point thousands of nonprofits, and one of the ways we do our webinars, a little different from everybody else. We ask participants. So we talk about brand identity and the importance of brand. We ask participants to submit their nonprofits for a group review. And so it's a blind review in the sense that nobody has seen this until we get into this conversation. And so I start off by talking about some of the key principles of design, and then we take a look at 10 different nonprofit brands. And this is kind of cool. It's very similar to what you said on Reddit. Here's a website. Let's talk about it. And one of the interesting pieces of feedback is every person who runs a nonprofit who submits their brand for an evaluation walks away with amazing actionable insights about how they can improve. So what you talked about is a very critical part of understanding how you can improve your organization. We talk about it in the nonprofit branding guide. Your brand, and I said this earlier, but it's worth reminding people, your brand isn't what you say it is. It's what people think it is. So you could say our mission is X and we do Y and we're very successful, but unless people believe that, that's not your brand.
Yeah.
And so asking people who are your donors, volunteers, the general public that knows you, what is your reaction when you see my brand? What do you think we do? And what do you think we do well? What do you think we do poorly? Important questions. Asking complete strangers, here's my logo, here's my website, here's some copy about what we do and our mission and some of our successes. How do you feel about those is equally important, because when you try to grow an organization, you've got two ways to do it. You can ask your existing donors and volunteers to just give more or volunteer more, or you can find more donors and more volunteers. And so that's why when nonprofits do focus groups with their new brand identities on Crowdspring, they'll talk to both audiences. You both want your existing donors and volunteers to consider doing more and giving more, but you know that's not going to be enough. You're going to need to expand the reach of your organization. You're going to have to find new volunteers. You're going to have to find new donors. And that's why it's great to involve the general public.
Oh, I love that. It's such good advice. If you haven't been taking notes of this, I have an entire pocketbook full of notes already, just because there's such great advice here. And I think that every nonprofit, regardless of your size, scope, or scale, can use some of the things that we talked about today, especially those psychology principles. Those things that you should be thinking about that you probably aren't because you don't think you have enough time, and then really looking at what you can invest in to make sure that you are everything that you say matches. And again, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to have a color scheme that does this. It is, does your brand look the same? Does your logo look alike? Look like it's inviting? people interested to it. There is real value in assessing what you do and who you are and the perception there. And I'm so glad that you got to talk about it today. I'm so appreciative of your time. Ross, if people need to get a hold of you, they want to say, okay, Crowdspring sounds like something that we need to do right away. How do we get a hold of you? How do we get you on our team? And then how do we start?
So crowdspring.com, CROWDSPRING. I'm sure you have it in the show notes. We got a great blog, crowdspring.com/blog, where we talk about, marketing, branding, and lots of entrepreneurial content. We have a lot of good resources. So marketing psychology, and I'll share that for the show notes. We have a phenomenal guide on 21 key principles of marketing psychology and lots of examples for how you could actually implement it on your websites and your communications. We're on Twitter at Ross Kimbarovsky. So you'll have it in the show notes, I'm sure.
Yep.
And then at Crowdspring. And so those are going to be the best ways. If you're on our site, you can connect with our support team. We offer free consultations if people are interested and not sure about their brand. And of course, as I mentioned, one of the things I recommend first is people grab a copy of the Nonprofit Branding Guide. I'll mention one other thing. We have a program for nonprofits we started in 2008 called Give Back. Give Back is our effort to do essentially that. Most of the nonprofits that run projects through Crowdspring pay for them. They're affordable. Once a month, we pick a worthy nonprofit from all the applicants and we give them a free project, whether it's a free logo or a free website. We work for free. Our designers work for free. It's the exact same process, except the nonprofit pays nothing. And we work closely with them to guarantee that they're successful. We just launched one yesterday, a new one for January. You can learn more about it on crowdspring.com/give-back. And you can include that in the show notes. So if you're a nonprofit and you're just struggling, even $299 is impossible for you. Submit your name and who knows, maybe we'll pick you.
Having those resources available, I'm just, it's so fantastic. So thank you for that. And I encourage everybody to go and click on, there's gonna be a lot of clicks out of the show. I just feel like it's gonna be a thing because there's so much good resource that we're gonna link below. Ross, I cannot thank you enough for the time. I cannot thank you enough for the perspective. Wonderful insight today. Really good thing to think about as you're starting your 2021 year. How can we be a better brand? How can we market better? How can we tell better stories? How can we get the perspectives of our donors and our supporters? And how can we engage them without having them spend a penny? Listen back to the show for a whole bunch of ideas, and go and click. Go get on this website, go click and go register and go sign up and spend that $2.99. It's going to be well worth it. Ross, thank you so much for being a guest on the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thanks so much, Patrick. My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it, my friend. Thanks.